Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Switch on the notification bells so you are aware that I am releasing another video, and thank you in advance because that really does actually help me out. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed already. I really cannot run this channel without you. I've got some Doctor Who things to share with you today. I've got a couple of things to talk about. One is David Tennant and the other is Doctor Who and it being woke and how it needs wokeness. But first of all, I want to talk about this character that you see here on the screen right now. We have the Rani on the screen, and you're probably thinking, why on earth do you want to talk about the Rani? Because we've got some great stuff to actually sink our teeth into. Well, I've been interacting with some posts on X and within the regards of Anita Dobson and the possibility that she is actually coming back. Bringing this particular character back to life is something that I don't actually think should be done. But with regards to bringing the character back, this is more to do with the fact that I actually think the Pip and Jane Baker estate is actually pretty complicated, and people seem to think it's really simple on X, but I really don't think it is. If you don't know who the Rani is, she is a character that was introduced during the Colin Baker era by the husband and wife team Pip and Jane Baker. She starred in two classic stories, Mark of the Rani and Time and the Rani, and was associated with the Colin Baker Doctor for one story, and then she was used as a tool to introduce the Sylvester McCoy Doctor after Colin Baker was unceremoniously fired from the show. Absolutely disgusting. Anyway, but there are many people who actually do love the character of the Rani, and there are many people who really don't like the character of the Rani, and there are many people who actually criticised Pip and Jane's writing for Doctor Who and say it's cartoonish and all sorts of things. They're not a favourite, basically, and often considered the worst writers for Doctor Who, but I actually like the story of the Mark and the Rani, or the Mark of the Rani, excuse me, I did get that wrong there. So there is a possibility now that the rights have been obtained by the BBC, and I'm going to say that loosely, it's a very, very, very small chance, which is why people, of course, are speculating that the Rani is returning in the form of Anita Dobson. I will acknowledge the possibility, but like I said, slim chance, because Pip and Jane Baker were actually very protective over the rights of the Rani and who could actually write the particular character. And she is quite a particular character, if I want to be perfectly clear. And I also want to point out that there's not actually been a Rani story that has been written in audio format or screen format since the death of Jane Baker. Now, Jane Baker actually died in 2014, and the final Rani story, if I have this correct, and I think I do, was released in audio format in 2015. Now you're probably thinking, Rachel, that was a year after Jane died, but it's very likely that this story got commissioned and written and recorded with permission before Jane died, and therefore Big Finish still had the rights to actually go ahead and publish the audio play. And also, I would have thought that maybe because Jane died, there may have been some complications after, because they were joint owners of this particular character. So therefore, it may have said in Jane's will, it might not have actually said in Jane's will, but maybe with the character, you needed permission from both of the writers. And with Jane no longer being around, maybe Pip was never in a position to actually give his permission because Jane wasn't there. But also, one of the reasons why this is actually immensely complicated and therefore much more unlikely that the BBC got the rights to this is because Pip and Jane didn't have any children as far as we know, so they didn't have any grandchildren, so therefore we don't actually know where the rights actually went and what was said in the will and what actually happened. So months ago, when I was researching into this, because I was intrigued by this, I found a post on Reddit and I've actually gone and pulled it back out, and I'm going to share it with you now because this is actually really, really interesting. So let's take a look. Firstly, I am assuming with both Pip and Jane were ordinary residents in England when they died and not residing in property owned by the Duchy of Lancaster, the monarch, or the Duchy of Cornwall, the heir to the throne. Otherwise, this does not apply. Jane predeceased Pip As they were married and had no descendants, if Jane didn't leave a will, Pip would have received all her property, including her intellectual property. If she did make a will, she would have specified a residual beneficiary, someone to receive the remainder of her estate after she had given out all of her gifts. So that takes us to Pip's will. Assuming that he didn't specify someone to inherit his IP and there was no one living named residual beneficiary, then the residual beneficiaries would be legal partner, probably not applicable unless Pip remarried, which all things considered seems unlikely. Children, again, probably not applicable. As far as we know, Pip had no children. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren, even less likely to be applicable. In theory, though, Pip could have had a secret child who died after having a child of their own. Pip's parents, given his age, 91, it is almost certain Pip's parents predeceased him. But if he had a 107-year-old mother still alive, then she could have inherited. Pip's siblings, Pip's direct nephews and nieces, Pip's siblings' children and their descendants, Jane's nephews and nieces. There's some question marks around this. Probably shouldn't be here, but some of the wording is a bit ambiguous. Pip's aunts and uncles, Pip's first cousins and their descendants, Pip's half-aunts and half-uncles, Pip's half-cousin and their descendants. In short, anyone who is descended from Pip's grandparents could be entitled to a share of the remains of his estate. There are so many ways this can be complicated, you can probably spot them for yourself. If no heir can be identified within 12 years, Pip died in 2020, then rather than becoming the common property of all, the estate becomes property of the Crown, which in simple terms means the government. The local council would become responsible for residential property assets like money, go into government coffers, and IP would probably be sold off, but Pip's estate is not unclaimed. There is no Ernesto Albert Baker on that list. There's also, unsurprisingly, no Jane Baker. So as you can see, that would actually cause mega amounts of confusion and complications. And really, is that something that you would actually want to realistically be wading yourself into in order to obtain a right to a character that isn't necessarily the most favourite to bring back, even though she currently is at the moment, but she's not exactly popular? Is it worth it? And think about the amount of money that you would actually have to fork out in legalities in order to pay something like this. How many hours would you have to get a legal team working on something like this? This is a big feat, but of course, naturally, this also then leads to the question as to why Big Finish and the BBC may have actually had a lot of issues with obtaining the rights to this character in the first place. And this post also answers that question. So if the estate is claimed, why are Big Finish having issues? It's possible Jane didn't leave her IP to Pip. The most likely circumstance would be if she decided to leave it to a registered charity. This could lead to their joint IP having a lot of different owners and it not being entirely clear who owns the Rani. Pip's estate might have passed jointly to a number of relatives. This is particularly likely given Pip's age, as two siblings may have become multiple nephews and nieces. If they can't agree on how to manage his IP, and they might not even realize this is a big deal, then the rights are effectively inaccessible. Now, from what I can gather, Pip's estate has actually been claimed since he died in 2020, but that doesn't mean to say it is clear-cut and easy. Some people were predicting it would take about a year to actually get these particular rights. Really, it isn't. I'm not saying that the Rani will never return. She may very well return. She may have very well returned already to the BBC and Bad Wolf Productions. We don't know the wording of the contract. We don't know the wording of the wills. We don't know the wording of the estates. We really just don't know. And we don't know if the BBC truly ever cared enough about this character to wade into this legal battle. Well, not legal battle, but legalities of obtaining the rights when they're bleeding money left, right and centre and they are trying to increase our TV licence. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying that it's very complicated and people don't actually realise how complicated it is to actually fix something like this. People seem to think that it would take a year, it might take a couple of years. Not really. This thing could actually take decades. And naturally, when something dissolves into the estate, the rights become incredibly ugly and murky to obtain. And really, is it worth that kind of battle? My only fear would be that RTD would actually go ahead and demolish the character left, right and centre and totally ruin her like he did Sutek. True, she's not the most popular character. She's not a character that was ever really interested in the Doctor overall per se. The only time really she was ever truly interested in the Doctor was Time and the Rani, but that was because they had to use her as a tool to introduce the new Doctor. And she was named as the villain in her initial outing, but for the most part she was just interested in her experiments, and she was actually manipulated by the Master. She had no interest in the Doctor whatsoever. So if RTD brings her back, he's going to change her personality altogether. And speaking wise, so far, with regards to the cadences, with how she's speaking within the writing, I actually don't recognize it. One character that they do not need the copyrights for is the David Tennant Doctor, because whilst we have RTD with us, it's also a possibility that he may very well reintroduce David Tennant's Doctor. And the rumour is going around that this Doctor could actually save Doctor Who. And if this rumour comes into fruition and this actually happens, I'm going to do I told you so dance, because I said back when they regenerated, or whatever it is, that nonsense that you want to call it, I said that if it goes wrong, because they were taking a risk with the shooty Doctor, if it goes wrong and people don't like it and it's not well received, then they've got David Tennant there as a backup Doctor, and they'll reintroduce him as the show, essentially set out for its demise, which is a bit dramatic, actually, sorry. But let's take a look at this article from The Sun. Back again, David Tennant returning to Doctor Who after Ncuti Gatwa's shock exit, says bookies, as BBC show faces axe. David made a return to the series for 3 episodes in 2023, but is a 5-1 to become the permanent replacement for Ncuti, placing him in 3rd in the betting. The Astley spokesperson for BetIdeas.com says Ncuti Gatwa's tenure as Doctor Who appears to be coming to a premature end, and we reckon there's a firm chance the BBC turn to David Tennant once again to try and steer the series back on track. Tennant is arguably the most loved Doctor in the programme's history, and is a 5-1 to replace Gatwa on a full-time basis after his cameos in 2023. Tennant being the most loved Doctor has actually become debatable. I would say, even though he's not my favourite, that most people like the Tom Baker Doctor, and I actually also have a new great profound appreciation for the Capaldi Doctor in recent years since doing the rewatches. Tennant has actually been bumped down my list quite a fair bit, but I'm not here to talk about who's my favourite, by the way, which is Colin Baker. In my honest opinion, the bookies may very well have got this completely wrong. I really do not think David Tennant should return. This would be a massive mistake. RTD has essentially retired the character. Well, I say essentially, he bumped him off in Venice. So if the rumour is still going around that Ncuti has left Doctor Who and he is looking to further his career in Hollywood and that he has already filmed his regeneration scene, then this could be a very strong possibility, and I really just do not think that this should happen. David Tennant, it is time for you to step down from the Doctor and steer very well clear. Bringing him back will never ever work. It didn't work initially, so there's no reason why it should work for a 3rd time, and it will probably be a good stomping ground for even more woke agenda. But what do you think about David Tennant possibly coming back? But naturally, of course, the sole defenders of Doctor Who are still out there defending it, in accordance with the Radio Times anyway, who are a regular shill for Doctor Who. Doctor Who really does need to be woke, according to them. This article was published about 7 days ago, but I didn't cover it, so I'm doing it right now. Doctor Who needs to be woke, and there's a reason every sci-fi fan should agree. Doctor Who certainly has its problems, but wokeness isn't one. I'm not a fan of all things sci-fi, but from time to time I have been known to dabble in it, and whilst I'm not actually the biggest sci-fi fan, I actually highly disagree with that statement that every fan should actually, agree with this. Like clockwork, every few months there will be an uproar about how Doctor Who being woke has ruined the show. This time it has been claimed that the long-running sci-fi helmed by Russell T Davies has been shelved in part due to dwindling ratings resulting from fans' fury over unspecified woke storylines. The BBC has described this report as incorrect, stating Doctor Who has not been shelved. I think the fans have actually been very clear as to which storylines were woke, but anyway, this is not entirely true. I would actually say there hasn't actually been much in the ways of reporting of how woke Doctor Who has actually been recently. There's been a lot of defense articles, but other than that, not much. And we have a very good reason to actually say that we believe this show has been shelved. You're right, the ratings are extremely low, but the AI score is also extremely low, which is also very telling. And it's very low for a Doctor Who series actually overall as well. And it is the lowest in RTD's history for writing for this show. And if you're not pleasing the majority of people who watch the show and you're only pleasing the minority, then what you are actually doing is ostracizing those people who, the majority. And of course, they're going to complain about it. And then there's also the rumours that RTD has moved on to Channel 4 to write his new show Tiptoe. And he's going to be seeing that all the way through because he's also a producer on it. And also we've got the rumour about Ncuti Gatwa. And we've also got the rumours about Bad Wolf Productions letting out their production space. The thing is, the argument that wokeness has ruined Doctor Who is not only predictable, boring and lazy, it's also nonsensical. Doctor Who certainly has its problems, but wokeness isn't one. I completely disagree. Wokeness is something that has been part of the downfall of Doctor Who. The actual writing for the show itself has been unbearably predictable, boring and very lazy. Ironically. First off, we need a definition here to be clear of what we are talking about. The idea of being woke has evolved in recent years and now has a particular negative connotation, often used to refer to people viewed as oversensitive about political and social issues. But at its base level, being woke refers to the idea of being aware of and attentive to important issues, especially social and racial injustice. I'm going to take a moment to actually point out that was the original meaning of woke. Woke does not actually mean that anymore. Woke now encompasses a far greater and broader definition. Woke is very blatant and it's very obvious. In many cases, with what happens is because you are attempting to put something in and force something in, you then begin forcing it down other people's throats and then forcing those people out, and you're telling them that this is how it is and they have to accept it for what it is and this is what they have to believe. And if you don't like it, then that's on you and that's tough. And in addition to that, then woke actually costs these companies a lot of money, and it takes them a lot of time to actually realize that woke is a problem for them. They prioritize DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity really should be equality. And they also prioritize woke over everything else. And it hampers them, and they forget that they are telling a story. They don't weave it into the plot naturally. They just go wham bam, thank you man. If you don't like it, jog on. Looking at that definition, it's not exactly groundbreaking to argue that Doctor Who has always been woke. It's pretty obvious, but we'll say it again for those in the back. From its very inception, the show has always depicted the Doctor fighting against tyranny and oppression, and it has always been aware of current culture. Too many of the storylines to count, both in classic and modern Who, have covered poverty, evil empires, capitalist greed, and more. Doctor Who has not always been woke because today's definition of woke is not the original definition of woke, if that makes any sense to you. Back when they were actually doing classic, they were actually focusing, believe it or not, on telling really damn good storylines, and some of these storylines are absolutely fantastic. And if you actually got the message that had been woven into the plot naturally the first time round or the second time round, then, that's great. But if you really did not get it, that's fine. It doesn't actually matter so long as you are actually enjoying the story and the entertainment put in front of you. That was the priority. Doctor Who was progressive, but not woke. It has always been progressive and inclusive for its time, lest we forget the show was initially made by a woman ahead of her time and initially directed by a gay man. In fact, the criticism angled against Doctor Who has often shown why we need its inclusivity and representation so much. The sexism we saw when Jodie Whittaker was cast as the Doctor shows exactly why we needed a female Doctor. The racism which Ncuti Gatwa has faced as the first permanent black Doctor was heartbreakingly unsupported surprising, proving why we needed him. The homophobic complaints against the gay kiss in Rogue, though it was far from the first same-sex kiss in the show, spoke for themselves. Now, in many respects, this is correct. However, I don't think this person is actually being very clear here. It's making it sound like Classic, who has never actually had the inclusiveness that we see today and the representation on screen. It very much does. But from the very beginning, it's actually been inclusive and representative. But they don't make a song and dance about it in Classic Who. Today, in today's world, we're told that we have to accept it whether we like it or not. They make a song and dance about it. This sexism that we allegedly see when Jodie Whittaker was cast as the Doctor was because we didn't really need a female Doctor. We have plenty of time ladies that have been well established throughout the actual canon of the show. Rani is one of them, despite what I actually said about her earlier. They were just changing it for the sake of changing it and telling us this is what we've got to accept, when it is actually established in hard canon that the Doctor has always been a male character. If you really want to get pedantic with this particular article, then you can argue that the fugitive Doctor is actually the first Black Doctor and Ncuti is the second. If you accept that as canon, naturally, of course. Now, there is a good chance that there may have been some racism towards Ncuti. I'm not going to deny that. But he wasn't exactly what I would call the most approachable when actually talking about the show. Being the Doctor in the early days for him when he took over the role, he said some pretty nasty things. But the Doctor has always been inherently depicted as a white man, and I understand why people would have some issues with it. The Doctor's change in race, personally, I wasn't too bothered by it. I was more bothered by the fact that we actually had a male to female Time Lord, and I actually do like Jodie Whittaker as an actress, and I'm sure there were probably many homophobic complaints as well about the gay kiss on screen, and there would have been when Jack kissed the Doctor, or the Doctor kissed Jack, whichever way round it was now, can't remember off the top of my head. But I do think that a lot of people have more of an issue with the fact that the Doctor was being irresponsible and he was running around abandoning his companion and being completely out of character and chasing after a man he just met, then snogging his face off. They were doing this because the Doctor had never had a gay kiss on screen. Well, I say that loosely. We do know that the Doctor has kissed another man on screen before, but therefore they considered this an injustice. So they went ahead and they did it just because they could. As our culture progresses, or regresses as might be the case, Doctor Who should and will always be a mirror of that. The series, as an enduring pillar in the sci-fi genre, has always and will always be woke, so it can reflect our society back at us. Otherwise, what would be the point? Sci-fi, after all, has a responsibility to hold a mirror up to society, to comment on it, and to help us see things from a different viewpoint. The magic of sci-fi is being able to escape our lives for a little bit and be immersed in another world, another time, or another civilization. And in doing that, we can take a look back at our own world and our own society and culture in a new light. If you want me to be honest with you, if you're actually talking about reflecting it in sci-fi, I always thought that was more of a duty of a soap opera rather than sci-fi. To be honest with you, at the end of the day, I just want to be entertained with an enthralling story that's just above my level so I can actually try and work it out rather than being told what it is that I actually have to watch. It's kind of funny because when they actually act like this, it just puts me off from watching stuff like this, and therefore I actually get ostracized. And I'm just talking in general here. I'm not necessarily talking about Doctor Who. This is the kind of behaviour that we've had across our entertainment for quite a few years now, more than just a few years. Probably getting close to a decade, possibly even more. I don't know, maybe I'm just being dramatic. And yes, that does mean your favourite sci-fi novel, TV show, film or franchise is woke too. All of them cover topics from colonialism and war to gender and LGBTQ plus issues to capitalism and corporate greed to technology and AI, and by definition, all of them have to have an awareness, or wokeness if you will, of our culture to be able to shine a light on humanity and our society. It quite literally comes with the territory. How about iconic sci-fi novels like Dune, Left Hand of Darkness and Brave New World? Woke, Modern classic novels like Ender's Game, Lilith's Brood and Leviathan Wakes, woke. Iconic sci-fi TV and film franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars, woke. YA dystopia franchises like The Hunger Games and Divergence, woke. Modern sci-fi phenomenons like Black Mirror and Severance, you guessed it, also woke. But we don't hear of other sci-fi franchises being criticised for being woke quite as much as we hear it about Doctor Who. As for why that is, a few reasons come to mind, but the most prominent one is that it's an easy and lazy excuse to jump to about an incredibly heavily scrutinised show. I take it then Star Wars has actually recently changed its name because this is often heavily scrutinised as woke. I hate to break it to you, Doctor Who is incredibly woke, but what do I know? I'm just lazy and I jump to that conclusion automatically. I don't actually think that Doctor Who is currently woke in a very good way at all. In fact, actually, it's absolutely abysmal. Instead of working all of these things that this person has actually mentioned in the article naturally into their plots and their storylines and their overarching storylines, they just decide to actually throw it in and do a pronoun lecture, which automatically jars the plot to a complete standstill, just for 5 seconds of recognizing some kind of social injustice. And most people are not actually willing to listen to something like that in this day and age. They don't like being lectured about pronouns. Woke in reality, well, today's version of it is actually, in many respects, oppressive. They believe they are fighting for a social injustice, but really it just ostracizes the majority of people and it pushes them away. But when Doctor Who is sloppily written and when the ratings show a small drop, and if the Disney deal does come to an end, it certainly won't be because Gatwa wore a skirt in one scene, or because the Doctor kissed a man, or because there was a transgender character in the show. Now, I don't actually care that there was a trans character in the show. That doesn't actually bother me. The age thing was the most problematic thing with regards to this trans character, and there's reasons why RTD actually aged the character up. He knew it would be extremely problematic and he could actually have got into a lot of trouble for including a trans child. I'm surprised he actually didn't get into any more trouble for including a trans teenager, because there's no such thing as trans children or trans teenagers. And I have actually called that out on the channel before. And if I actually recall, Ncuti also had one idea for his costume and that was shut down by the creatives. He was told that he was going to have multiple different costumes, and this was not, of course, naturally well received. Now, kissing in Doctor Who has actually been around since the Paul McGann movie, and overall, it's actually something I don't like in Doctor Who. I don't like the Doctor kissing anyone. To me, he is asexual, and I actually think that is a sexuality that does actually need representation too, and that always seems to be overlooked, because what's often condemned as Doctor Who's biggest failing is actually its biggest strength. Reflecting our culture back at us and being so progressive and inclusive is the reason the show has endured for so long, because it's spoken to millions of people across the globe and given them a place to belong. But does the last series reflect anything as to what was going on socially, injustice-wise, with our culture? Not at all. If it truly was something like that, then they wouldn't actually jar a plot just to make a point. They would actually weave these things naturally into the storyline. In reality, there would be hope for things like this to actually be woven into it and actually go over our heads. And if we get it, great. If we don't, that's still okay. Did you know I actually didn't know for a very long time who the Daleks were actually based on? But that's okay. I don't have to know. But I do now. But it didn't matter that I didn't know. They also wouldn't reintroduce a character like Davros and change him just to make a point. They would just retire the character. That would be the much more natural and progressive thing to do in many respects. It would have been a lot cheaper to have actually gone ahead and released a statement saying that they were no longer using the character of Davros because of certain connotations. Yes, okay, it may have still got the backlash that it would have received, but at least then we wouldn't visually see it happening on screen before our very eyes. But they really do not think that way because they believe that people really want them to be socially aware and pushing these boundaries, but they just don't know how to write those sorts of stories anymore. So they just throw it in willy-nilly and hope for the best. And then they get upset when fans don't actually like it, when it's done that way. That's what makes them feel ostracized from their own fandom. That's what makes them switch off their TV sets. Doctor Who is progressive, but it has never been woke, especially in accordance with today's definition of it. Woke today is to tell us how to think and what we should be thinking, and if we are not thinking that, then we are in the wrong. And the people who are responsible for this are the people who are doing the writing and the creating for all of the entertainment that includes this type of stuff. Actors are not entirely innocent, but for the most part, they are generally just bringing words to life for the actual role, even if they believe what they are saying or not. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Switch on the notification bell because that helps me out a great deal. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye bye.